A lot of you have asked, over the last year, I've had several people comment on the fact that I launched this channel, PNR WeatherCentral, last summer because I wanted to help keep people safe during stormy weather. And everybody's like, oh, you're such a weather nerd, TC. Well, I grew up in the Midwest. I was born in Spokane, Washington. I lived there for the first 5 years, but most of my grade school years were spent in Ohio, central Ohio, where my mom's family was centered. And we happened to be there 50 years ago today, April 3rd, 1974. This was the date of the worst outbreak of tornadoes in history up to that time. There was a worse one with a higher number in 2011. But the 1974 super outbreak would forever be a part of my life. And I wanted to tell you why. Hey guys, TC Kirkham, TKR VideoCentral and the Kirkham Report. Welcome to this special. On this particular day, April 3rd, 1974, I was 11 years old. My mom got me up out of bed as usual, but I wasn't going to school. It was parent-teacher conference day. My mom had an appointment to meet my teacher, my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Carpenter, at 11 a.m. So my mom, my then stepdad Frank, and I got ready. We went to the school. We'd go to the school at that time. Now, that morning while we were having breakfast, Mom was watching the news, the Today Show in particular, because they were the only show that had news on in the morning. There was Captain Kangaroo and local stuff, but only NBC's Today Show had national news. And newscaster Frank Blair showed the Skywarn forecast, which had Ohio in its little hatched area for possible severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. Now, my mom was loyal to Joe Holbrook, the senior meteorologist at WBNS TV Channel 10 in Columbus at the time, and he had said there was going to be a bad day today also. So, as we ate breakfast and we looked at the TV, we were a little apprehensive. We had no idea what was coming. So we all got done, we got dressed, went over to the school. Mom went up to meet Mrs. Carpenter, and Frank and I hung out with other kids and parents in the playground, and we were still talking about the weather. We had both become weather-centric since moving to Ohio in 1969. The weekend we moved into our own apartment from my grandma's house was the weekend we got the remnants of Hurricane Camille in Ohio. Lots of severe weather that weekend. And Frank and I were talking about it, and, we were like feeling already, it was not even 11 o'clock, it was already in the 80s, the humidity was huge. We both knew it was going to be a bad day. We got to the school around 10:45, and we were talking, and as Mom was meeting with Mrs. Carpenter, Frank, who was working swing shift at Owen Corning at the time, was concerned we wouldn't get a good meal in us if it was storming, so he wanted us to go have lunch before we went home. He had to go to work at 3. So at the time now, we were living in central Ohio, Newark, Ohio, or outside Newark, Ohio, actually. We'd lived around different areas. We'd lived in Utica for a while, which is north of Newark, and lived in Newark and Heath for a while. Now we were living in the small town of Marne, what Wikipedia calls a census-designated community 6 miles east of Newark. Little tiny town, maybe 500 people. No school of its own, no real businesses of their own. And we had moved in there the previous year when we left Heath into a house that was owned by a lady that my mom had worked for when she was a teenager and was now our landlady. So after Mom got done talking to Mrs. Carpenter, who I adored and who she also really liked when she met her, we told Mom we decided we're going to go get lunch. So we drove into this little cafe down at the Eastland Shopping Center, had lunch, still talking about the weather and wondering what would happen. Now, I'd become conditioned at this point, because my mother was loyal to Channel 10 in Columbus, to get freaked out whenever they had weather bulletins on. Channel 10 had this terrifying, you'd be watching TV and then suddenly there'd be this big slide on the TV that said, in tiny print at the top, WBNS 10 TV, and then giant letters, Weather Bulletin. I would run out of the room screaming, Mom, weather bulletin! I didn't want anything to do with it. I hated that thing. It scared the crap out of me. And it's probably where I get my wariness about storms today. I much prefer the crawls they use and the little beeps, and it's why I have the weather radio. I'm used to that. It gets kind of crazy when you think about it. That's how I'm trained to be weather aware, I suppose. As we ate lunch, Frank and Mom talked and decided although we had a basement, it was kind of grungy and you had to go outside to get into it. No, we didn't, not in that house, sorry. In that house we could go into it, but it was kind of grungy, and we decided Frank didn't want us home alone. So Mom called Edna, her friend and our landlady, and Edna, being the wonderful person she was, said, come on down, stay with us while Frank's at work. Because they had a full basement, also kind of grungy, but safe, and further underground than ours. Ours was partially above ground. So we got ready after getting home, and we all piled into the car, and Frank dropped us off at Edna's house, which was about half a mile down the road on a little side street. She also lived in Marne. And we got off there, and he took off for Owens Corning in Newark, where he would work. At the time, Edna lived with her brother. I think his name was Harold. I'm not sure. I don't remember. And her 3 grandchildren, Teddy, Pam, and Ronnie, who she'd gotten custody of when her son had been killed in a car accident 2 years earlier, and we were actually living in the son's old house. It was a very interesting afternoon. Mom and Edna went in the kitchen. They had the radio on. They were cooking and talking and doing things that they do. None of the kids were home, and I was sitting in the living room with Harold, and he had the TV on. And we were watching. We didn't really talk much because he was a very quiet person. Very nice, friendly man, but very quiet. And we were watching, and several times, thankfully he didn't have Channel 10 on. He had Channel 4 on, so their weather alert thing was a little bit less crazy. Didn't send me into the spasms of terror that Channel 10's did. We had several bulletins come through. Eventually there was a tornado watch for our area. We'd been watching all of the storms as they started to pop on west of where we were in Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky, and western Ohio. Right around 5 o'clock, when the 5 o'clock news was coming on, he did switch over to Channel 10, and Channel 10 was bringing the first words of a tornado that had wiped out Xenia, which was a town about an hour and a half across the state from us, down by Dayton. Xenia would become forever known after that because of that F5 tornado that went through there at roughly 4:30 in the afternoon. Wiped out half the town, killed 30-some people, destroyed the school. Most of the footage you see from that day comes from Xenia. I had a lot of stuff I wanted to show from that, but I'm not going to get a chance to because of the fact that I didn't get to present this the way I wanted to because of computer issues. The rest of the night, we had tornado watches and severe thunderstorm watches, and thankfully, while everyone around us, there were tornadoes happening in western Ohio and in Kentucky and even up as far as Ontario, our area, we got 2 or 3 severe thunderstorm warnings. We were in Licking County in Ohio. We didn't get any tornadoes. I think we got 1 tornado warning, but it never touched down anything. It was a heck of a day. And as the news reports started sliding in over the course of the evening, TV would break in with bulletins about tornadoes in, various other states and such. By the end of the evening, 148 tornadoes had hit 13 states in just an 18-hour period on April 3rd and in the early morning of April 4th. And it was the biggest ever total of F4 and F5 tornadoes. Now, of course, the super outbreak is what made Dr. Ted Fujita a star in the meteorology community. A lot of meteorologists were resisting his F scale for tornadoes up to that point. This gave him his detailed mapping of all the tornado tracks coming to all these cities, working with his then graduate student and now well-known Weather Channel personality, Dr. Greg Forbes. They put together this incredible map of all 148 tornadoes. Later, it was decided that one of those tornadoes was probably a downburst, but they've never changed the official total of tornadoes for that day. And that day scarred me for life, number one, because I was terrified most of the day. And it made me a weather person. I have been interested in being in weather since then. I didn't have the math skills to actually get into meteorology, but I am a competent amateur storm follower. And it did really ramp up my awareness of what this kind of thing can do. This is why I spent most of last night, when I would have been producing this show if I hadn't had trouble with the computer yesterday, watching Ryan Hall y'all on the internet on YouTube, and the coverage of the storms, which also hit Ohio yesterday, and a few other states. I still have family in Ohio, and I have friends in the vinyl community all over, and I keep an eye on them, and in the wrestling community and the reseller community. And when it storms, I worry about them. I worry about Melinda Murphy and Happy Hippie down in Kentucky. I worry about Dawn and Mary in Michigan. I worry about Beth in Missouri and Katie in Florida. I worry about you guys. And I keep an eye out when there's storms in the area, because it's important to me to know that my friends are safe, and hopefully that they're making it through okay. Yesterday, when Melinda Murphy put her video up, I commented, "I hope you stay safe in the bad weather," and she wrote back and said they'd gotten up in the middle of the night due to a tornado warning, but they were all okay, and that's good. I always worry about stuff like that because I am a weather worrier. Now, one of the reasons I redid the office is just so I could have this. I mean, last night I had 5 screens going, all 3 monitors with 5 or 6 different things going on them. Ryan Hall and Andy Hill at the center, who are just the best online weather people I've ever seen. And in fact, Ryan did this shirt, and I got it from his site. The whole point is to keep people safe. April 3rd, 1974 changed me in so many ways. It was the first of 2 major events like this I would go through. The other was the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and I'll talk about that sometime too. And it was forever to be a part of my life. And I think it also helped trigger my love for disaster movies. After April 3rd, 1974, late 1974, we moved back to Washington. One of the first things I saw in the theater was Airport 1975, which is not a great movie. In fact, it's terrible. But as an 11-year-old, it absolutely terrified me. And I loved it, every second of it. I went and saw the original Airport. I began seeking out disaster movies. I'd seen the Poseidon Adventure before, but it hadn't really clicked. And ever since then, I've been a disaster buff, not just movies, but real-life disasters as well. I did a show for a while on PNR called Catastrophe Vortex that talked about disaster movies and real-life disasters. And thankfully, those were bad enough that they've all gone away, but I will eventually be doing stuff along those lines again because I love them. My wife has gotten me books on my birthday and Christmas about them, and I have tons of research stuff, like I have chart books for my music stuff. April 3rd was something really, really terrifying to me as an 11-year-old. I think a lot of it was because the adults around me were just as scared as I was. It was a day that nobody will ever forget. Now, I know that there was a worse super outbreak in 2011. That particular outbreak did produce over 200 tornadoes, but that also stretched over a slightly longer period, and there were not as many F4 and F5 tornadoes. I have recommended so many people, and I'm going to include a list of links to other people I truly enjoy and I feel cover the weather events of the world really well below. Some of them have done some spectacular shows on April 3rd and 4th, 1974. Carliana, June 1st, WeatherBox, Jake SWEGLE over at SWEGLE Studios. I will have some links to you to check out. I will also have links to stuff about the real coverage, the actual coverage of the event, and I hope you'll check it out. If you do, maybe you'll understand why I feel the way I feel, why I am the weather junkie that I am. Now, part of this special was supposed to be me interspersing footage and audio from the day with the top 10 songs in America that year, at that time. And I didn't get to do that because of the way my system has been acting. But I found it interesting that the top 10 songs of that week truly reflected the whole feeling of that day. In many ways, there were songs that are always, these are songs that are ingrained in my head as a child, not just because of this day, but because they were just great songs. The top 10 in America, according to Billboard magazine, the week of April 3rd, 1974. Number 10 was The Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me by Gladys Knight and the Pips. Can't say that applies. Number 9, Mockingbird, Carly Simon and James Taylor. Number 8, TSOP, The Sound of Philadelphia by MFSB, featuring the 3 Degrees, known best as the theme from Soul Train from 1974 to 1976. Dark Lady by Cher was number 7. Come and Get Your Love by Redbone, number 6, which has been revived by Guardians of the Galaxy. Number 5 was appropriate, The Lord's Prayer by Sister Janet Mead. Believe me, I would have had that song playing on repeat if I'd had access to the 45s I had that day. Number 4, Seasons in the Sun, Terry Jacks. Number 3, Sunshine on My Shoulders, John Denver. Number 2, Benny and the Jets by Elton John. And the number 1 song in America that week was Hooked on a Feeling by Blue Swede. I remember most of these songs as coming earlier in that year, but they didn't. Mainly because, I don't know, maybe it was because I didn't want to associate them with such a dark day. But they were great songs, and many people in these states that were affected probably heard them played in and around some of the news coverage of the day. It was pretty fascinating, and it was a fascinating day. And I thank you for watching this and allowing me to share my memories. I'm nowhere near the experts you can watch in the notes below, but it was a day I'll never forget. 50 years ago today, it was the day that Ted Fujita put himself on the map, the day Xenia was almost classified as an inconceivable F6, and a day that will be remembered by millions of people who went through it, who were around it, who were nearby it, and who lived through their own storm stories that day. For Super Outbreak, I'm TC Kirkham, the Kirkham Report, and TKR Video Central. Thanks for watching. Ciao, baby.